This is Margaret Woods. She's a licensed social worker working at the Carter Burden Center. She's been there for 8 years, working in case management and then now in elder justice. She graduated from the NYU Silver School of Social Work and has worked in veterans care, mental health care, and palliative and end-of-life care. So we're really glad to welcome her today to talk to us about elder justice.
I am the director of the Elder Justice Unit here at the Carter Burden Network. Carter Burden Network is a community-based organization that's situated on the Upper East Side that provides services to older adults ages 60 and older. We've partnered in the past with JASA to provide services, but as this year, January of this year, we're the sole provider of the services in the borough of Manhattan from Districts 1, Community Districts 1 through 11. A little history about Carter Burden. He actually was a council member of Community District 8, I believe. And so this agency got started from a councilman's office. Older adults were coming in with all different types of issues around housing, around benefits, around money and things of that nature. So Carter Burden Network was born over the 53 years that it's been situated here in the Upper East Side, blossom into older adult services, which include older adult centers, case management, case assistance programs. We have a volunteer services program. We have a health and wellness department, and we have elder justice, of which the CEMAPP program, which stands for Community Elder Mistreatment Abuse Prevention Program, that's a lot, is partially funded by the New York City Department for the Aging or New York City Aging, the Monroe County on Aging, the U.S. Administration on Aging, and Lifespan of Greater Rochester, and participant contributions. So obviously, elder abuse hurts everyone. So what we're kind of here to do is understand so that we can respond and protect. Just some facts about elder abuse. And these facts come from a report. It's a huge report that was done back in 2011 called Under the Radar. And Lifespan of Greater Rochester, which is upstate New York organization that deals with elder justice across the state, gathered these statistics. And basically, it's a problem that impacts 8% of the population, or 1 in 13 older community dwelling persons in New York State and the city. But it's estimated that only 1 in 24 cases, or 4% of the cases, are reported. So it's a very underreported crime, but it is happening. And among those cases reported, a family member was the abuser in 90% of the cases. So one of our biggest challenges here in reducing this incidence of abuse is, the lack of understanding of what it actually is. The goal of this program is to raise awareness of elder abuse, to help older adults recognize the different categories and signs of abuse, as well as professionals to provide guidance and resources towards addressing the issue. And we serve older adults ages 60 and older who live in Manhattan Community Districts 1 through 11. So we follow the guidelines of service as directed by New York City Aging, also formerly known as the New York City Department for the Aging. What is elder abuse? So according to NYSEAC, or the New York City Elder Abuse Center, they define elder abuse as a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate actions which causes harm, the risk of harm, or distress to individuals 60 and older, and occurs within a relationship where there is an expectation of trust and or an intimate partner and or familial relationship. So siblings, mothers, children, adult children. It could be, relatives of any kind. And then it's typically also a targeted act that's just directed towards an older person because of their age or the fact that they have disabilities. So here are the categories that we will kind of discuss somewhat today. So there's psychological, emotional, and verbal. There's physical, sexual, neglect, which is broken out into passive versus active neglect, and financial exploitation. They've been on the rise since the pandemic, and they are increasingly targeting older adults because older adults are in their homes, they're isolated, they have disposable income, and that loneliness and social isolation makes them unfortunately prime targets for scammers and people who would take advantage of them financially. Just going through some of the forms. So we'll start with psychological, emotional, and verbal. In our unit, the statistics do bear out that the majority of the cases that we have are people who are living together who are related. Could be, through blood, could be through marriage, could be former spouses or former girlfriends, boyfriends. They're still living together for whatever the reason, if it's financial. And so these cases often show up in psychological, emotional, and verbal abuse. And so what is it? It basically subjects a person to behavior that results in fear, mental anguish, or emotional pain, and includes. Now, this list is not exhaustive, but these are some of the ways that we see it in the cases that we have currently in the unit. It can be through an intimidation, threatening, or the harming of the older adult's pets, destroying property, name calling and infantilizing, telling the older adult that they're stupid, they're ugly, they should die, those types of ugly things, threatening them, threatening to harm them, threatening to kill them, threatening to harm something that they care about or love, or interfering with spiritual or religious practices. How does that happen? Sometimes if the alleged abuser is responsible for taking the older adult to different places, the doctor or shopping or to appointments, or to accompany them to their religious place of worship, by stopping to do that or interfering with that or not allowing them to do that, it's a form of psychological and emotional abuse, because it disconnects them from a community that they are participating in that gives them strength in some way. So some signs, not exhaustive. It can show up in the form of complaints by the older adult about what's happening in the home, complaints about how they're being treated, complaints about how their money is being used, maybe against their will, or if they gave permission to do certain things and those things only, and the alleged abuser takes it further than they intended. There may be some complaints about that. There could be anxiety, agitation, or anger. These emotions often lead to a higher issue that's happening. And so you will see an older adult who's presenting this way and you wonder, like, what else is going on? Sometimes it could be something that's happening in their home or happening in a relationship that they rely on or someone that they trust. There could be isolation and withdrawal. All of a sudden, this person is no longer participating. You normally see them doing things. They're out, they're active, they're enjoying their lives, and then slowly but surely they start to withdraw. You don't see them as much. Things are happening that seems out of character. That could be the sign of something going on in their lives that's abusive. There could be confusion on the part of the older adult because this is happening to them and they don't quite understand why, because they've taken care of the adult child all their lives until this event happens, or they're responsible for taking care of their grandkids or their great grandkids, because we do have clients who are now caretakers for the next generation and the generation after that, because the alleged abuser, who was their child, is either a substance user or they're using alcohol or they have a mental illness and they are unable to fulfill that parental role. So they have been taken care of, and then this happens, and then there's confusion on the part of the older adult, like, why is this happening? I've only done good for this person, and now this season of my life they're taking advantage of me in some way. Overreaction to stimuli. You have a person who startles or jumps the slightest movement or something happens, and those are things to kind of take notice of and to ask further questions, to inquire, what's happening, what's going on, is everything okay at home, is everything okay in your life? Sometimes it'll take some time, but sometimes they will reveal that to you, but it takes a lot of work and a lot of trust, building of a lot of trust. So physical abuse, it results in injuries to the body, including, not an exhaustive list, there's hitting, pushing, choking, burning, throwing objects at the person. So all of this stuff that causes harm to the physical body is physical abuse. And forcible restraint, forcibly holding a person against their will in the home that's causing bruising, that's causing problems with their movement, that results in scars, lacerations, bruising. That's physical abuse. And the cops should be called immediately, because we're talking about assault. And assault is an arrestable offense, which will allow the older adult to perhaps gain an order of protection, which is something I'll talk about a little further, so that they can remain safely in their homes. So some signs of physical abuse. We know that there can be some inconsistencies with the story. You're talking about older adult who may rely on the alleged abuser for certain things in their lives because they're unable to do certain things, like go to the store or go to the bank or, go to the doctor on their own. And so oftentimes you will have older adults, and we've had these cases where we suspect there is physical abuse going on. They have bruises and lacerations that you really can't, explain, but they will have inconsistencies with their story. This is a voluntary program. We're not like Adult Protective Services, aka APS, where they're mandated to go in and to investigate and see what's happening. We are a voluntary program, so if they choose not to work with us, we really can't force them to. So signs of physical abuse can be, you know, where is the injury? Where is the location? You know, are there grab marks on the forearms? There could be sewn or torn clothing, the older adult. And you notice that the older adult is normally used to being clean and presentable and their hygiene is intact. All of a sudden, these things start to unravel kind of slowly. Tension between the client and spouse or caregiver. You notice that. Like the relationship was good at one point, and then all of a sudden, you know, there's tension. You feel it, you hear it, you know, you see the body language between them, and something is kind of off. And usually those signals, those little signals that we tend to ignore, are kind of like the little telltale signs or the little signs that we need to kind of pay attention to and ask questions, ask further questions. There could be open wounds, cuts, and untreated injuries that aren't explainable otherwise. And the older adult may not be saying where they got the cut, where they got the wound, where did this bruise come from. Could also be, you know, the result of a medical issue that causes bruising. They could be taking a certain medication. There are blood thinners that you take that when you take them, if you're not careful, it makes you prone to bruising. This is why it's important as professionals to have an open mind and a curious mind, inquisitive, not interrogating, but just to find out what's happening in the older adult's life. There could also be like broken glasses, missing dentures, missing hearing aids, things that the older adult relied on, but now all of a sudden they are missing and they don't know why, or they were taken from them and they can't find them. This is also a tactic of alleged abusers in order to control them, because if you can't hear what's going on, you know, they can basically tell you, you know, I'm taking your money, or I'm going to take your bank card and I'm going to use your money. But if they don't understand what's happening, or they can't hear what's going on, or if they say, here, I need you to sign this piece of paper, but they don't have the glasses to read it, and they could actually be signing something that basically gives the alleged abuser control over their finances or control over their lives in some way, that can really be a problem. So those are things to look out for. Sexual abuse. We don't talk about it, but it does happen. Older adults are sexual beings throughout their lives. We don't like to talk about that, but it does happen. We have had cases in the unit where there were spouses who were engaged in this activity. There were partners who were engaged in this activity. And it's any behavior that hurts you sexually and includes unwanted sexual content without your consent, and can include, not an exhaustive list again, inappropriate touching, fondling or kissing unwarranted, rape, taking photographs in sexually explicit ways. We have cameras on every phone, have the ability to record, have the ability to post to the internet. And these are things that, if not careful, once it's up there, and it can cause, you know, real harm to a person's reputation, can cause harm to them emotionally, can cause harm to them, you know, in many different ways. Or there can be exposure to explicit sexual content without your approval. Also, what's not there is like it can cause, you know, problems. It's engagement starts out as sexual in nature, and then it becomes abusive in that form, and then it takes another form in that, you know, a person will then start to exploit them financially. So then one level abuse, see, these levels of abuse can kind of build on each other if you're not careful, until the older adult finds themselves trapped in this relationship or this situation, and they really don't know how they got there. And it can be, you know, really devastated, you know, if not addressed, if they don't have a safe space to kind of talk about these things, you know, that are going on. So neglect, we broke it out into active versus passive, because neglect is one of those things that's really a fine line in terms of, is this abuse? Is this not abuse? You know, how do we know for sure? And so active and intentional neglect, you know, the abuser is aware of what they're doing. They are aware that they're causing harm to the victim. Why? Because they're usually motivated by greed or other forms of self-interest. A lot of cases that we have where older adults are being taken advantage of financially by family members, or, you know, or friends or people that they trust, is over the fact that, you know, money is a motivating factor. A strong motivated factor has always been one, and probably always will be one. Sometimes in the cases that we have adult children who have always lived with their parents, have never moved out on their own. They don't have viable employment to take care of themselves, and so they have relied on the older adult all their lives. They're getting older, the older adult is getting older, but the older adult may have access to resources because they did work, they did have a career at one point in time, they were successful at things, they had professions, and they worked and functioned in society, and now they have access to funds, be it Social Security, annuities, you know, pensions and things of that nature, savings. So this is a motivating factor for the alleged abuser to take advantage because they're motivated by feeding a substance use habit, or they're motivated because they don't have money, or a sense of entitlement. They feel like they're entitled to use their money because it's going to be mine anyway one day when you die. So I want to use it now. Obviously not appropriate, but it's, active, it's intentional because it's motivated. So they can cause harm to the older adult because they're motivated by greed. Versus passive or unintentional neglect, where the abuser is not entirely aware that they're causing harm or not really focused on the fact that they're causing harm. And it's usually based on factors such as ignorance or denial that the older person needs as much care as he or she does. I often use the example of, because we have cases like this where there is an older adult, they've lived here all their lives were here. They had children moved away. They set up lives someplace else. Now they're older, still have a child. Actually, we have cases even now where the older child is out of state, many states away. And so they have some services in place, but they might not be sufficient for the older adult's changing needs. So in a sense, because you're separated from the issue, or because you may not contact your mother or your father as much, or you may not see them as often because you may live on the West Coast and they live on the East Coast. We do have a case like that. Things can happen that you may not be aware of, or you may have the care that you put in place, say 5 years ago, may not be sufficient now because certain things have changed that you're not present to see, or you're not here to kind of witness. And so you haven't addressed that need in some way. And that can be like a form of passive neglect, in that the older adult needs your assistance or needs the help, but because you're not present or you're not seeing it, not that you're intentionally doing it, but it needs attention, which you haven't been able to give for whatever the reason. And so that can be out of ignorance or out of just not knowing that things have changed. So signs of neglect, whether it's active or passive, it's the failure to fulfill a caretaking obligation, resulting in a wide range of problems, including, these are physical, bed sores. There could be dehydration on the part of the older adult because they're not eating properly, they're not drinking enough water, they don't have home care services, they don't have someone to shop for them, to buy groceries, to make sure that the house is fully stocked with food, or they have what they need. There could be poor hygiene, they're not able to take care of themselves, poor nutrition. And if all of these things are left unchecked for a long period of time, and these are things that could kind of happen over time and you're not really paying attention, as it gets worse and the person, unfortunately deteriorates as a result of these things, it can cause death. It can lead to death. So financial exploitation, this is going on in a rapid way. The statistic is that in 2021, I believe, there were over 92,000 victims of financial exploitation fraud that resulted in $1.7 billion of losses. So that's older adults who have collectively lost $1.7 billion of resources that they desperately need to continue to live their lives, to continue to be housed, to continue to be fed. They lost that money due to scams, due to financial exploitation, due to family members taking their money, due to family members inserting themselves in their financial lives in ways that they did not intend, through fraud, through false pretenses. It can be through embezzlement if you're dealing with a person who's still working, they have a company, and you're taking money. Conspiracy, forgery, which happens a lot with older adults, people signing things. Understanding that older adults have financial lives and being able to know what those financial lives are, like where your money is, where it's going, is very important, because people are waiting to take advantage of you, unfortunately, through these ways, falsifying records. We've had clients who have children who have pretended to be them through false pretenses to gain access to certain funds, or to put their names on documents, to put their names on bank accounts, all kinds of things. And so when you notice that all of a sudden their rent is falling behind, or their bills aren't being paid, or things are stacking up, that could be the sign of a bigger problem. So some signs, there could be disparity between assets and living conditions. Like, they have the money, you may know that they have sources of income that will allow them to maintain their daily lives, will maintain their maintenance or their roof, their rent, and keep a roof over their heads. But their living conditions, if you see how they're living or how they're dressed or or how, they're presenting themselves, that there's a disparity and you're questioning, like, how is this happening? That could be a sign of some problems. Sudden changes in banking practices. All of a sudden, everything switched to Cash App, or everything switched to, one of these other mobile types of financial, apps where the client doesn't even know how to use a cell phone. And now you're seeing all of these large withdrawals. We've had cases like that, where there's large withdrawals of money that the client has no idea how this is happening. Like I said, there could be unpaid bills. There could be abrupt changes in their will or powers of attorney that gives other people access to their resources that maybe they didn't sign. Maybe they signed under duress because they were being threatened psychologically or emotionally or verbally to sign those documents. There could be substandard care. Like I said before, although the funds are available to provide the care to the elder, they're not getting as much home care as they can afford to have because someone else has decided maybe to use those funds for something else other than the older adult's care. Signatures being forged on documents. The older adult has no concept of why this is happening. Financial considerations for adults. And we signal this out because this kind of hinges on capacity, your ability to know like where your money is going. That's very important. And just the notion of capacity itself, because sometimes, not often, but as we age, there could be health issues. There could be a history of a disease, be it Alzheimer's or dementia that runs in the family, that can eventually change a person's capacity, their decision-making capacity, that will impact how they live their lives. And so capacity is the person's ability to make decisions for themselves and to understand what those decisions will mean for them. And the CEMAPP program can only work with people who have capacity because they need to be engaged in a safety plan. They need to be engaged with their worker every month. And so they need to understand and be able to make decisions for themselves, to be able to devise a safety plan that they feel they can carry out that will be helpful to them to remain safe in that situation. And so capacity plays a huge part in their ability to work with their worker to do so. While you have capacity, it doesn't necessarily go for older adults. This is the audience that I deal with, that I work with, that I dedicated my social work career to. It's important for anyone who has capacity. Like, you get to decide how to spend your money. You get to decide who your caregiver may be if you need care. You get to decide if you're unable to take care of your health and your finances for whatever the reason. You get to assign an agent who would either be a healthcare proxy or a power of attorney to do these things. So you and, or a loved one, someone that you trust, you can decide if you need an informal caregiver who will just help you manage money on an as-needed basis, go to the post office, deliver your mail, pay the bills as necessary. Some older adults still write checks. Not everyone, but some older adults are savvy. They use online banking. But maybe someone to kind of help informally. Or do you need a formal caregiver? Who through an established legal arrangement, be it a power of attorney if you need one, or a trust, or whatever other vehicle that may be established to help you manage your finances. So you have to decide, okay, is this a formal situation for me or is it informal and there's someone in I trust? If there's diminished financial capacity, where a person's ability to manage money and to know where their financial assets, how they serve them, what's in their best interest, they have the inability to understand the consequences of those investment decisions or those, financial decisions, then that's diminished financial capacity. And so planning ahead will be helpful to help them stay in control of their finances until that day when they can't manage, when it becomes more of a serious problem. So in terms of organizing important documents, wills, healthcare proxies, list of financial contacts, those things are important to have in place if you have them. If you don't have them, I always encourage my older adults in my case management life and working in palliative and end-of-life care, having a healthcare proxy was important because they had serious chronic and terminal illnesses. And, you wanted a voice in the room in the event that you weren't able to manage and speak for yourself or to manage your life on the outside until you got out of the hospital, till you got out of rehab and returned home. So these are important documents and things for people to have. Provide your financial professionals, if you have them, with trusted emergency contacts. Emergency contacts are vitally important because in the event, especially for us, in the event that we can't reach you for whatever the reason, we're dealing with older adults in some really serious situations, unfortunately, some situations that can cause them physical harm. And so having trusted emergency contact information is vital in the event that we can't reach reach them, because then we need to know if they're okay, if someone else has spoken to them, if there's someone we can go to in the event we can't reach you, to find out how you're doing or to assist you in whatever question or issue that you may have. So considering making a durable financial power of attorney is very vital. This allows you, if in the event you become diminished in some way in your capacity, you have designated an agent to manage your financial affairs that will allow you, A, to keep a roof over your head, pay your rent, keep your lights on, be able to, shop for you and buy groceries and things of that nature. Keeping records up to date is vital because, sometimes you can designate a power of attorney, but then you might have a falling out with that person and now no longer want them to be involved in your affairs. I've always explained to older adults that these are living, breathing documents, that as long as you have the capacity to change it, you can change it at will. When you feel that there is someone who will better represent your interests, then you can change that. And that's up until you don't have the ability to speak for yourself. Also, as long as you have the capacity to create these documents, we have a lot of cases where older children feel they want power of attorney because they want access to your assets. But if the person has capacity and can say what they want to do, then the power of attorney is not binding. It's not legal. It only becomes in effect once the person has diminished capacity. As long as the client has capacity, then that power of attorney is just a piece of paper with the person's name on it that says, in the event I can't manage my finances, then this is the person I designate. So oftentimes abuse will happen in the financial realm only because people are motivated by greed. They want access and they want to force an older adult who has capacity to sign a power of attorney. It's not binding, but they try to do this in order to manipulate. And most importantly, I encourage, whether it's the older adult, which is hard sometimes because these are people that they love and care about. These are people that they rely on. These are people that, they've either raised or had some type of impact, some type of engagement with in life. And so they don't like the way things are happening, but it's a struggle. There's a lot of ambivalence around speaking up because this is wrong, because they feel like they're being wrong, but this is their son, this is their daughter, this is someone that they care about. But we encourage you to speak up and say something when it's wrong, because that's the only way that we can really help you. And that is hard. It's difficult. It takes some time, but through building trust as professionals working with older adults, the more you can build trust with the older adult, the more you can kind of find out what's happening, giving them a safe space to discuss it so that you can figure out how to intervene. Being curious if you see something, you being curious and asking questions to kind of get more information to show, and then you can let them know that you're concerned and you just wanted to kind of get some further information to see if they are okay. Sometimes they will open up and tell you what's going on. So some key takeaways, as I've said, it impacts older adults age 60 and older. It occurs within a relationship of trust. That relationship of trust can also include home health aides. Someone that comes into your home, someone that's tasked with fixing meals, with tasked with doing, washing your clothes, perhaps taking you to the doctor. These are people who they come to rely on and trust. And this also can be a source of abuse. This is where abuse can take place as well. It could be a familial relationship that just happened as a result of a person's age or disability. I talked about the 5 areas where elder abuse can show up, but being aware of it, including any irregular behavior or financial activities and any obvious physical signs of abuse, is kind of, the breadcrumbs that will lead you to what's really going on in the older adult's life. So our program, the support system, what do we provide? So our program provides supportive and crisis counseling for people who are suffering from any of those 5 forms of abuse. We provide security. So as a client of CEMAPP, you're in a situation, you need your lock changed, alleged abuser broke your lock for whatever the reason, you need the lock changed, we can do that. There's certain instances where we can't change the lock, like right then, certain other things would have to happen. If there's a housing eviction type of thing going on, we'd have to wait until that process runs out. Once we work through that process and we get the alleged abuser out of the home, the client wants their locks changed so that they can feel safe, because the alleged abuser may have copied the keys, may have an extra copy of the key, then we can do that. We can provide some legal guidance and court advocacy. So we don't have a legal arm here at Carter Burden, but we could refer out to the community, where necessary, depending on the client's specific situation. We can help connect them. If they need a power of attorney, we can help connect them to legal resources that can provide that for them. If there's an order of protection, our community partners are NYPD, Safe Horizon, the family and the criminal courts, the DA's office, we work with them. time to obtain orders of protection, because that sometimes is definitely necessary, even if the person, the alleged abuser, still has rights to live within the home. There's a difference between a limited order and a stay away order of protection. Sometimes the older child is on the lease, and so we can't evict them, but can get the older adult a limited order of protection so that they don't harass them, so that they don't, do certain things while they're living in the home. Coordinating with the client's attorneys, accompanying the client to either housing court, or if there's a criminal order of protection and, they want support, we can do that. We do coordinate with NYPD, and we provide, community education programs such as this, just providing information about elder justice. There's caregiver support, because we find that when we connect a alleged abuser who are caregivers, and it may be overwhelming for an older adult. Sometimes when we connect them to caregiver support programs, sometimes that causes, the overwhelm to lessen, which sometimes lessen the abuse. This is another quote from the Under the Radar study, How to Reduce the Occurrence of Elder Abuse. It's a community-wide response, and that's the only way to effectively reduce the prevalence of elder abuse. So it takes a village. It takes a village to detect. It takes a village to alert. It takes a village to intervene. It takes a village to increase awareness and recognition around the various forms of domestic elder abuse. Elder abuse occurs within a family system. And so only when we can increase awareness and we can recognize and hopefully detect it and intervene and persecute and prosecute and report it, are we able to reduce elder abuse in the community. But it does take a community-wide response. It takes eyes and ears and hearts that are compassionate and that care, curious minds that kind of want to find out, like, what is happening? I see things aren't quite right. Can we talk about it and see what the older adult is going through? Because oftentimes they don't really know which way to turn with that. So how to make a referral to the program? You can either call 311. If you call 311, you say elder abuse, they will connect you to the program here, or you can call into the unit directly. We have created online a referral form that you can fill out. You have to answer some questions so that we can get some details in order to do some possible intake or to follow up with you and to see what's going on and how, if possible, how we can intervene. Some cases that we don't accept, where there are cognitive and capacity issues. Like I said, if you don't have the capacity to kind of make those executive decisions, that would be an APS or an Adult Protective Services referral, because they have resources that we don't. Namely, they can do a psychological evaluation to determine your level of capacity. If it's determined that you don't have capacity and you need a guardian, then they can provide a guardian. That's a lengthy, expensive process that the city can afford to pay for, but unfortunately we can't. Landlord-tenant issues. Really, the only thing we can do about that is we can probably try to refer you to legal resources and provide you some counseling around how to manage the relationship, but to actually do something about, my landlord is trying to force me out my apartment, those types of things, that's a legal matter and we really can't manage it. But we can, if the client agrees to monthly counseling, trying to work out a safety plan, if they feel unsafe while that process may be happening, we can try and do something like that to help the client in that way. But then they would have to engage legal services to assist with the other matters. And in cases involving disputes with neighbors, we can't really manage that. Once again, we offer like mediation or things like that if the other party is willing to go. But outside of that, we can offer the client counseling and maybe access to some conflict resolution skills if they come in contact with the neighbor often. But outside of that, we encourage them to alert your building, file a complaint with NYPD, call Safe Horizon to inquire about an order of protection if possible. My staff, small staff, but we're mighty. It consists of 2 social workers, 2 senior case managers, and they speak English and Spanish. And we have the MSW intern who speaks Mandarin. And this is an area that's not talked about a lot. It's a niche area in social work, but it's definitely something that is occurring, and definitely since the pandemic has increased in terms of, just how we relate to each other and how we relate to older adults in general. And so we're all getting older. How we treat them now possibly will be how we will be treated later if we're fortunate enough to get there. So just trying to create space to empower so that we don't get to the point where we're just really taking advantage of people who, as they age, don't have access or don't have the ability to kind of maintain their lives in the way they thought that they possibly could. We're here to support.